Junie B, first grader. Boss of Lunch. Written by Barbara Park. Chapter 7. Jobs. Pretty soon, Mrs. Gutzman told me all about my jobs. "You're going to have 3 fun jobs today, Junie B," she said. "I think you're going to like all of them." She took me to the long counter where the children push their lunch trays, and she showed me where the napkins go. "Your first job will be to keep napkins stacked up right here on the countertop. If the napkin piles start to run out, just reach under the counter and get more, okay? Do you think you can do that for me, Junie B?" I nodded real fast. "Yes," I said. "I know I can do that, Mrs. Gutzman, 'cause I'm already familiar with napkins." I smiled real proud. "I use napkins at my very own house," I said. "I use them to wipe my mouth after dinner. Plus sometimes I use my sleeve." Mrs. Gutzman looked funny at me. After that, she handed me a sponge and took me to the counter by the sinks. "Okay, your second job will be to keep this big counter wiped off," she said. "You don't have to clean any big messes, Junie B. Just wipe up any little spills or crumbs you see." I grinned real big. "Sponges are another job I am good at, Mrs. Gutzman," I said. "'Cause one time in kindergarten, I practiced throwing sponges in my toilet, and I didn't even miss the pot hardly." Mrs. Gutzman's face went kind of pale. "Oh," she said. "Oh my." After that, her voice sounded a little bit worried. "Well, there's just one more job I need to tell you about," she said. "Do you see that door over there? That's where the children come in the kitchen to get their lunches." "Yes," I said. "I see it." "Well, when you're not busy with your other jobs, I'd like you to be our lunch greeter," she said. "Do you know what a greeter is, Junie B? A greeter smiles at people and says hello. Do you think you could do that?" This time, I didn't answer her right away, 'cause that job made my stomach feel jumpy inside. "Yeah, only there's children who I don't even know at this school, Mrs. Gutzman," I said kind of shaky. "And some of them are big kids, and big kids are not my favorite size." Mrs. Gutzman did a chuckle. "Don't worry, Junie B. I think you'll find there are lots of very nice big kids at the school," she said. "Could you just give it a try, please?" I shrugged my shoulders, kind of weakish. "I don't know. Maybe I could," I said. Mrs. Gutzman gave me a pat. "That's the spirit," she said. "Now there's just one other thing we need to talk about before you get started." Then guess what? She reached under the counter, and she gave me another pair of mitts. I quick held up my hands for her to see. "But I'm already wearing mitts, Mrs. Gutzman. See them? You already gave them to me yesterday." "I know, but these are brand new ones, Junie B," she said. "Around here, we change our plastic mitts quite often. We're constantly washing our hands and changing our mitts." I scratched my head. "No kidding," I said. "Really? You mean I'm supposed to wash my hands plus wear mitts? My, that's a lot of hygiene, isn't it?" Mrs. Gutzman did a teensy frown. Then she took me to the sink, and she washed my hands real good. After they were dry, she put the new mitts on me. "Whoa, these are the cleanest hands I ever saw," I said. After that, I skipped back to the counter, and I began stacking napkins. Pretty soon, the kitchen started getting smells in it. I sniffed the air. The smells were not delicious. "P.U.," I said kind of quiet. Mrs. Gutzman looked over at me. I held my nose. I smell stinkle, I said. Mrs. Gutzman did not look happy. Holding your nose isn't sanitary, Junie B. Now you'll have to change your mitts again. I kept on holding my nose. Yes, but if I let go of my nose, the stinkle will get in my nostrils, I explained. And that smell is not delightful. Mrs. Gutzman looked annoyed at me. What you're smelling is our lunch today, Junie B, she said. We're baking tuna noodle casserole. We're going to be serving it with carrots and peas. I made a sick face. Bluck, I said. I hate peas. It's a good thing I brought my lunch today, right, Mrs. Gutzman? At least now I will get a decent meal. Mrs. Gutzman still looked grumpy. She came over and changed my mitts. After that, I stacked more napkins. And I tried to just breathe through my mouth. Chapter 8. Lunchtime. Being a helper is not a breeze. After the lunch bell rang, big kids started coming into the kitchen. 2 of them pointed at my hairnet. They called me the name of Freakazoid. I felt very crumbling inside. Now I'm not even going to greet you, I said real quiet. After that, I tattletaled to Mrs. Gutzman, and she grouched at those boys. Plus, also, she said I didn't have to greet people. Instead, she said I could sponge the counter. I hurried over there my fastest. Then I sponged and sponged until the big kids were gone. Pretty soon, I looked at the door again. And guess what? I saw my friends from room 1. I saw Herb and Lenny and Jose and Shirley and Roger. They were at the counter with their trays. I ran over to them speedy quick. Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. Look at me. See me working in here? I am being a helper, see? I said. All of them smiled and waved. Hi, Junie B. Hi, they said. I skipped around in a circle. See my outfit? I am a real professional lunch maker. See, I look just like Mrs. Gutzman. I showed them my sponge. And look at this, I even have equipment. After that, I ran back to the sinks, and I showed them how I wiped the counter. Can everyone see me over here? I asked. I am the boss of this whole entire sponged area. After that, I zoomed the napkins. Plus also, I am the boss of the napkins, I said. See how I stacked them? If I keep up the good work, someday I will be the boss of this whole operation, probably. Just then, May came in the door. She did a mean laugh. You are not a real lunch maker, Junie Jones, she said. They're just letting you pretend. Don't you know that? All of a sudden, I felt steamy mad inside. 'Cause I am sick and tired of that dumb girl. I stamped my foot real hard. Yes, I am too a real lunch maker, I said. Can't you even see my outfit, May? If I am not a real lunch maker, then how come I am wearing mitts and a hairnet, huh? May did not answer. I'll tell you why, sister, I said. 'Cause I'm keeping hair and germs out of the tuna noodle stinkle. That's why. Behind me, I heard Mrs. Gutzman groan. I turned around to see her. Her face looked very sickish. I turned back to room 1. Their faces looked sickish too. One by one, all of them put their lunch trays back. I don't really feel that hungry anymore, said Herb kind of quiet. Me neither, said Jose. I had a really big breakfast. Then, very slow, all of the children started backing out of the kitchen. I watched them from the door. They backed all the way to our lunch table. Mr. Scary was waiting for them there. He talked to them a minute. Then he came into the kitchen and talked to Mrs. Gutzman. They whispered to each other for a real long time. Also, they kept looking at me, and they wouldn't even stop. My head got drops of sweaty on it. I wiped it off with my sponge. After that, Mrs. Gutzman closed her eyes again. Then she walked to me, very nice, and she took away my sponge, and she said my job was done. Chapter 9. Baloney. Monday. Dear First Grade Journal, Room 1 is still mad at me about Friday. After we went back to the room, Mrs. Gutzman brought bologna sandwiches for the children who didn't eat. They were not a hit. I sat at my desk, and I ate out of my new lunchbox. I had a tasty peanut butter and jelly sandwich, 'cause brought lunch is better than bought lunch. And that is not even my fault. Some of the children watched me eat. They made growly faces at me. Today, Herbert is my only friend. Also, Lenny and Jose are being reasonable. I wish Friday never happened. From Junie B, first grader. I peeked my eyes at the clock. It was almost 2:15. Just one more hour before I could go home. I tried to make the clock go faster with my eyes. It did not actually work that good. Just then there was a knock on our door. Mr. Scary answered it. "Why, hello," he said. "Why, hello yourself," said a friendly voice. And guess what? It was Mrs. Gutzman. She walked in the room with 2 boxes in her arms. My heart pounded and pounded to see that woman, 'cause what if she came to scold me? I slumped way down in my seat so she couldn't see me. Mrs. Gutzman set the boxes on Mr. Scary's desk. Then she looked all around the room. I slumped in my seat even farther. Only too bad for me, because Blabbermouth May pointed at me. "Mrs. Gutzman! Mrs. Gutzman!" she hollered. "Junie Jones is trying to hide from you. She is sliding down in her chair so you can't see her, but I am keeping track of her movements." After that, I slid all the way to the floor under my desk. I curled into a ball and hid my head. Pretty soon I heard feet walking to my desk. I am getting used to that sound. The feet stopped next to my chair. I opened one eye and peeked out. I saw the bottom of Mrs. Gutzman's white apron. "Junie B," said her voice, "why are you sitting on the floor?" I didn't move any muscles. 'Cause maybe she would still go away, possibly. "Junie B," said Mrs. Gutzman again, "I brought something for your class. Don't you want to see what it is?" I shook my head real fast. "No, thank you," I said. "I don't want to see it, and so you can be on your way now, please." I opened my other eye and looked at her feet. They kept on standing there. Then, all of a sudden, I heard a loud groan. And what do you know? That woman squatted right down next to me. I was shocked to see her. "Mrs. Gutzman," I said, "what are you doing down here?" Mrs. Gutzman did not look comfortable. "Please, Junie B, I need your help," she said. "I brought cookies for your class today, but there's no one up there to help me pass them out." I rolled my eyes way back in my head. 'Cause that was not even the truth, of course. Yes, there is, Mrs. Gutzman, I said. There's lots of people up there to help you. Mrs. Gutzman shook her head. No, you don't understand, she said. After that, she reached into her pocket, and she pulled out a pair of plastic mitts. I need a real helper, Junie B, she said. I need someone with experience. Mrs. Gutzman smiled kind of painful. Please, she said. If we don't stand soon, I'm going to fall right on my keister, and you'll never get me up. I did a teensy smile, 'cause that was a little joke, I believe. Finally, I crawled out from my desk, and I helped Mrs. Gutzman stand up. I guess I can help you pass out cookies, I said kind of quiet. But some of these children are still very mad at me, you know. Mrs. Gutzman held my hand. Yes, well, I think maybe I can fix that, she said. After that, me and her walked to the front of the room together, and Mrs. Gutzman showed everyone the cookies. Sugar cookies, shouted the children. Thank you, Mrs. Gutzman, thank you. Mrs. Gutzman put her hand on my shoulder. Don't thank me, class, she said. Junie B. Jones is the one who reminded me to pay you a visit this year. She's the one you need to thank. For a second, no one said anything. Then, all of a sudden, Herb hollered out, Thank you, Junie B. Jones. And then all of the other children hollered thank you too. I grinned real big, 'cause those words felt happy in my ears. After that, I hurried back to the sink and washed my hands. Then I quick put on my mitts and ran back. Mrs. Gutzman gave me a thumbs up. Ready to go, helper? She said. Ready to go, I said back. And so then both of us passed out all of the cookies together. And I did a perfect job. And so here is what I am thinking. I am thinking that maybe someday I won't be the boss of lunch after all. Maybe someday I will just be the boss of cookies instead. Because boss of cookies is the most delicious job I ever heard of. Plus also, I will get to make all the cookie rules. And I have already thought of rule number 1. I wrote it in my journal so I won't forget it. Rule number 1. 1. The boss of cookies gets to have 5 sugar cookies all to herself. P.S. Only never eat them in front of the children, 'cause that would be rude probably. P.S. again. Plus sometimes she can even eat 6. Huh. The end.